Good evening, good evening, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode 944 on the air everywhere. This is for Monday, the 19th of February, 2024, the pre show, the magical time of the program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time, we say really, really outrageous things. So, welcome. A few minutes tardy getting the pre-show started, but it just happens. Sometimes you get all backed up here. Had to have. So let me show you what I had for dinner this evening. So I bet you our guests have probably never had this in a long time.
I I don't know if I've ever had it.
Beef aroni.
Beefaroni.
It's the greatest. I mean, and I sucked that thing down. There's nothing left in there. I mean, I just sucked it down. So, when you work weird hours, you just do what you can do. So, beefaroni was the meal of choice
Beefaroni.
this
That's a
evening.
Seinfeld episode.
At least it
Yeah.
wasn't Vienna sausages, James.
Um, I've never been able to handle those things. JB has tried his best, but I just couldn't do it. Um, all right, we got
Hello,
Andy, we
Andy.
got
Yeah, it's good to
Bill.
see you.
Hey, Bill.
Yes,
We got a quorum right here.
here comes James A.
Everything else is just gravy.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
we're good now. We are cooking with gas. So got the chemtrail guys on me yesterday.
I saw that. That was a pretty
Yeah.
unusual picture, James.
No, it's an interesting case study in social science. I need to get Kim to review all the comments. There's I think 1,400, and it's an interesting social science study, that whole thing. And I knew that they have a chemtrail action team, and they come after you real quick, but it was pretty fierce. And when they come in, they come over from all over the country. But yeah, and they sent you these nasty private messages too. I mean, it's bad. All right, let me. I got to get my right audio set here. Hang on, I am totally out of whack. All right, now let's see. Now, I think you should hear me, and let's see if you can hear the audio here.
Yep, heard some chemtrails.
Okay, we're good. I do so many Zoom calls, I have to
cool.
change the audio configuration. So we're good. Here comes Jen, who's back with us this week. Mails in.
Thank you.
Probably the only guy old enough to remember mails in on the Addams Family.
Yeah, Bill gets his own email delivery. That's
delivered right to his
the
desk.
office. Wow, Jay,
Can't beat it.
Mails in.
Y'all are funny.
So no, the Addams Family.
Now we just have so much of it to throw away.
Go search mails in Addams Family, and you'll see what I'm talking about, because it will make no sense to anybody.
My physics today just came.
Physics today. I get those
for the AMS.
I think it comes with the AMS membership.
There's the 40 under 40. Are you in the 40 under 40, James fan?
Well, I've not been under 40 in a long time. Long time.
Then my favorite thing, the Daedalus Books catalog. It comes about every 3 days, and I always buy something.
Look at that. I've been getting all my tax forms.
Oh, don't even start. I got to get ours back. Weather Factory.
Yeah, it's tis the season. Jen, have you done your taxes yet?
April 15th.
Yeah, I got a lot to look at here. So
yeah, the WeatherBrain. We have a WeatherBrain show that night, won't we, on April 15th?
Oh,
we'll do it from the
a
post office.
Yeah.
Do like they used to do, go down to the news stations, or go down and film the late people turning in.
And there'd always be
taxes.
some guy dressed up as Elvis down there at the post office on April 15th. Those days, now we all use TurboTax, and we don't have to do that anymore. So
I do. I have to mail mine because independent contractor, I have to do every quarter. So that's a lot of fun.
Oh,
so,
man.
Yeah.
that's nasty.
Yeah. I'm not a fan.
Don't blame me.
That's just nasty. All right, we got to wait at the top of the hour here in 13 seconds, and we can start the show. And Andy, we give all of our guests the same courtesy note. We're live on YouTube, and we're about to be live on local television here in 3, 2, 1. And hello to our television audience. Welcome. It's Monday night, time for the Monday night weather party. WeatherBrains. We're about to get this thing started. Weather's nice and calm here, so let's roll track number 1 and track number 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band. The AMS Weather Band is a global community of weather enthusiasts dedicated to learning and sharing their love of science. Visit amsweatherband.org to learn more and join the band today.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
You heard Bill Curtis say it. We're kind of a big deal. Our homes smell of rich mahogany. We have many leather-bound books. Hey, this is WeatherBrains, episode number 944 for the 19th of February, 2024. Thank you for joining us on this Monday night. And for those that listen to the podcast version, just so you'll know, you can watch this live. Not that you'd want to, but we streamed the live video version on the WeatherBrains YouTube channel, live Monday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. And you get all the bonus features like the pre-show, the magical time of the program that doesn't make the audio podcast version. So let's see here. Jen is back with us. Welcome back, Jen. Good to have you back. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to see you guys. And I was hoping I could get through winter without what we got this weekend, and it was not fun. I think we ended up with about 5 or 6 inches of the heavy, wet snow here. And I had this gazebo out back. I almost made it all winter. And then the snow was so heavy, I looked out there, it was completely ripped. So rest in peace, my gazebo.
Oh,
but yeah, it was really thick, but it's all gone now. I mean, it's been warming up pretty nice, but man, I was hoping we could have made it, but we didn't. So
and you still got some winter left. Come on, it might happen again. Who knows?
No, I'm done. I'm done.
This is like we're just here in mid-February here. We got a ways to go. Let's drop in a little farther to the south and see what James Adelot's up to in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Beautiful here today. It was cold Saturday, and it's just been uphill in a good way ever since. We're likely looking at 70 tomorrow with light wind and sunshine, and I can feel the little sickness developing now.
Little spring
we know
fever,
that James will be coming into the TV station in his tank top and flip-flops when he hits 70. So you know the spring is getting close. Let's go down to the low latitudes here. Troy Kimmel is in Austin, Texas. Troy, you hit 100 yet?
What latitude did you say I lived at?
Yeah.
have friends in low places.
Low.
30 degrees north. Now we got up to sort of like James in a way. Got up to 68 out at International Airport today and 69 downtown. So it was a nice day in Austin, lots of sunshine around, and forecasting some 80s around here by mid into late week, and then a little bit of a cool down. And looks like another rebound to highs around 80 by early next week. The National Weather Service in New Braunfels today actually mentioned the fact this looks like a very dry weather pattern for us. We don't see any rain over the next 7 days, and really you have to go into the month of March with something maybe in the models, but not hopeful for it at this point.
Same thing down here. Really, for the rest of this month, we don't see any big rains, severe weather, ice, snow, tsunamis. It's nice and quiet for the next couple of weeks, which is
Don't
good.
bring
So
that
Bill,
up right now. No.
Bill Murray, let's bring in our guest, and we'll talk tonight. It's going to be a good show tonight.
Yeah, James. Tonight's guest weather brain is a former registered nurse, over 20 years of experience in nursing practice and education, but he's been publishing for 30 years, and he's written extensively, various publications, and managed the production of numerous healthcare textbooks. But he has gone and written an incredible book, Donora Death Fog, which is about one of the most fascinating events in weather history to me. It's subtitled Clean Air and the Tragedy of a Pennsylvania Mill Town. The University of Pittsburgh Press published it this year. last year, last April. I'm still in 2023, Andy. But it
That's
delves
okay.
into the historic Donora smog event in 1948, and that's what we're talking about tonight. Andy McPhee, welcome to the show.
Bill, thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here and delighted you guys are able to join, that I was able to join you guys. So it's
We're
great.
glad to be able to join you too. So we're in the middle of an incredible stretch of 3 shows. Andy, Monday night last week, we had a survivor of the 1958 Mount Baldy Boy Scout tragedy. You know, 6
Wow.
scouts went up the mountain on that Saturday, and only 3 of them came back down. They got caught by an unexpected blizzard. We had one of the survivors and his sister, who was the author, like you are, of a fabulous book. And next week we get to talk to all of our hero, Tom Grzoulis, who did the Tornado Project books. And he's just a hero in our world. But we're glad you're with us tonight. So this is a pivotal moment in environmental history, Andy. Let's get started first. First, we usually ask people what got them into weather, but you're not really into weather. But what
Well,
made
I
you
like
get into
weather.
this event? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a fan of weather. Uh, I'm big outside when I'm in weather. So, um, I I knew I wanted to write a book when I retired, and I had been looking for a topic, and I had looked at this one, I looked at that one, and nothing really was hitting me. And one night, my wife and I were watching television. We were watching The Crown, the Netflix special on a series on Queen Elizabeth II. And it was the 4th episode, and a scientist came into another scientist's office and said, "Does the name Donora sound familiar?" And the other scientist looked up from his desk and said, "Donora." I thought, what? And then a few scenes later, they go into Clement Attlee's office, and they said to him, "Does the name Donora sound familiar?" He said, "Donora, yes. There was an anticyclone, which is obviously another term for temperature inversion, there south of outside of Philadelphia." They said, "No, Pittsburgh." And I'm watching this, I'm going, why don't I know this? I'd always been a big into the environment and science. I started off getting a degree in biology and wound up in nursing, but it's like that's always been an interest. I wrote a bunch of environmental stories and earth science stories for Weekly Reader when I was there. So I thought, how do I not know about this? So I decided to look at it. And the more I looked at it, the more I liked it. But I needed to make sure there was a book there, so I went out to the Donora Historical Society and spent some time with them, with Brian Charlton there and Mark Pavelik, and they were wonderful. And I came away knowing there's a book there, because there hasn't been no book, there hasn't been any book aside from Deborah Davis's book, and she included a chapter on Donora and her experiences because Deborah was from Donora. So it kind of struck all the notes, and the more I learned about it, the more I liked it and knew that it was a story that needed to be told. So,
Well, I know what you're talking about there is resonating with Jen Nairmore, who's our resident tornado historian. Jen, echo what Andy's talking about with the value of historical societies in your research.
It's amazing. We're about to embark on another journey to some historical societies, libraries, newspaper offices up in the Xenia area in early March. And we made a big trip in Alabama back in August, and then Kentucky. And this is for the 1974 super outbreak. You know, you're going back 50 years now to try to capture the stories from these events and to go to these historical societies and to talk to folks who have the exact same interests. And the thing that I find, Andy, is that they want the story told.
absolutely.
It's a passion for them. They want the history right. And everyone that we've met and people in the community want to talk about it. Like they want to tell their story. And so whether or not it's, you know, an event like where I was able to cover and actually interview folks, it was amazing that they just want to be remembered. So I'm sure that's the kind of experience that you had too within the history centers with this event.
Oh, absolutely. Mark Pavelik has lived in Donora all his life, and he lives and breathes Donora. He's a just an enormous, he's an encyclopedia of everything Donora. Fabulous. And he's a great guy to begin with. And Brian Charlton is a historian, and he's lived outside Donora for many, many years. He's inside Donora now, and he's a great guy. And he was able to provide, thankfully, sort of a historian's bent, which I don't have. I am not a historian. I write. I write people's stories. And Brian was able to sort of fine-tune a little bit my understanding of a historian's eye, and he was so very valuable in many ways. But yeah, they just want the story told. They said, yeah, please, we'll help you in any way we can. So it was great. Yeah.
So Andy, I'd like you to meet Dr. Neil Jacobs, one of our esteemed panelists, who is joining us now. Dr. Neil, where are you coming from?
I am in North Carolina right now.
Now you got your toque, your toboggan, whatever that is. Is it? Have you been out tramping through the wilderness, or what have you
No.
been up to the last couple of days?
Well, my most recent project is trying to understand the electrical inner workings of a door switch on a washing machine. I finally just gave up and bought a replacement OEM and swapped the whole thing out.
better Neil that than Copperheads. So yeah.
That's true. I'll do you one better. When they break around here, I just buy a whole new washer. Neil's just a lot easier. But Dr. Neil, you mentioned you're extremely excited about tonight. What are you hoping to learn about Donora? I'm sure you know about that event.
I do. I'm kind of curious about, what's been, I guess, taken away from that event and from a policy perspective, and how are we going forward? Have we made improvements, as far as things? I do hope we have a chance to touch Andy on some of your other works. I'm particularly interested in some other books you wrote as well. But yeah, it's a cool historical event, I guess, a tragedy, but it's interesting that, sometimes I wonder how much we really learn from these things.
Well, certainly the air pollution today is much, much less than it was in 1948. So what happened was, you got to remember, this is 1948. It was an election year, and Harry Truman was running against, remind me.
Thomas Dewey.
Thomas Dewey. Thank you
Dewey
very much.
defeats Truman.
It was very, very close.
Thank you, Bill.
So this was one of the first things that landed on Truman's desk, and he addressed it fairly quickly, and he ordered a conference, the first national conference on air pollution. That was in 1950, and the follow-up to that, and that was the first time they said, okay, they got a bunch of scientists together. We have to start looking at this because we have no information. 1955 was the first conference, the first Clean Air Act, and it was the Anti-Pollution Control Act of 1955, and that came out of that conference directly. And from that, there were several amendments over the years until we get to 1970, which is the Clean Air Act that we know today, the one that Richard Nixon signed. Lots of amendments over that time till we get to 1990, when George H.W. Bush signed a huge number of amendments, very, very strong. It was the strongest anti-air pollution act, the Clean Air Act, that we've ever had. And it really put teeth into the regulations and the recommendations that had been in the original Clean Air Act. So that's what we've been working with. Yeah, there were some downsides, some changes made from 2016 to 2020. Some of those have come back, but we're much, much better than we were. But there are still issues. We still have a lot of particulate matter. Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Oregon, Missouri, Mississippi, along the Mississippi River Valley. So that we still have areas, as the rest of the world does. The London, which was the hotbed of pollution, they were very much like us. They are now ranked, and I'm talking about air quality index, the whole thing, 52nd in the world. So they're better. and the whole world is better off, but places like Delhi and Iran, horrible. Iraq, horrible. Pakistan, a lot of sub-Saharan countries, just terribly, terribly polluted, and millions of people still die each year. But it's way better than it was, because we don't know how many people died before. Certainly not as many as today, or certainly more than today. Excuse me.
Yeah, I know Birmingham, Alabama was,
Yeah.
growing up, we prided ourselves as the Pittsburgh of the South. And that may not have been always for the good, because James Spann, you remember all the smog events we dealt with, and now our air
Nasty,
quality,
man, nasty.
even though tomorrow we have a yellow alert, I noticed in Jefferson Shelby County, but we are so much better. It's not even funny. Andy, how much of that is regulation and how much of it is just economy, where it became too expensive to produce some of these things that polluted as much? How
Well,
much weight would you give to each one of those factors?
I think initially it was well, it's a mix. Donora, that which is the place I know the most about, and Pittsburgh falls along the same line, really. The equipment that had been being used in Donora was built in 1900, 1902, 1915 for the zinc works. And by 1948, 1950, 55, we're looking at completely antiquated equipment, completely antiquated processes, particularly in the making of zinc and steel. And so Donora just became, they closed it down, and it became one of the very, very many steel mills and nail mills and things like that that just went bust, because there are better processes that required fewer people, that were cleaner, but it really was a matter of making things more efficient and making more money for the owners. Once 1970 hit, and I don't think there's a whole lot of change between 50 and 70, but once 70 hit, it really began to be some teeth. It became politically expedient to talk about air pollution and what we're doing. Companies started to pay attention, but they really had been coasting on their laurels for a bit, and they continued to use the same kinds of processes. 1990 hits, and now they have to do something. So we're talking really 34 years, not even 34 years, a very short period of time, where companies have really had to cut back. Coupled with that, there have been economic reasons from the lawsuits. I talk in the book about the number of lawsuits in Donora after the smog, and there was 130 some odd, they received next to nothing. But it kind of woke them up, and there were the suits that started to gnaw away at U.S. Steel and the vulnerability of some of these other companies, Alcoa and others, that say, we got to start looking at this, because we're going to get tapped for many more dollars. Same kind of thing was happening in the cigarette industry, tobacco industry. So those kinds of pressures came to bear on the steel mills in Pennsylvania and Ohio and West Virginia, New York, the real steel belt. And so that's what we've been seeing today. So I think today with the electric cars, although you could argue that the making of them, the manufacture of electric cars, also causes pollution. So we're still in a tough spot, but they've been forced to make changes over the last 30 some odd years.
Hey, Andy, James in Tulsa. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
My question, because these happen, as you said, this era, thankfully, at least domestically, is mostly seems to have passed us by. But St. Louis was a big one too. Probably, I think that's pre-World War II. But what was the breakdown on these between industrial emissions and residential use of coal for furnaces? Because I know, even in London, a lot of the electric plants were coal fired for theirs.
Very, very good point. And actually, that was one of the understandable I won't say smoke screen, that's a bit harsh, but that was one of the things that the U.S. Steel people kept saying. And so how can you separate all the people who smoked in the 40s and 30s before that and 20s, and the number of coal burning stoves that were in town is well more than half, we've been told. And cars didn't get a lot of play in Donora, actually, because there were no garages hardly. There were driveways, but most people parked on the street, and they still do today. So I don't think automobiles was a big factor, or were a big factor. But yeah, it's cigarette smoke, it's coal stoves, and talk about London. In London, the primary problem was nutty slack. Nutty slack is a very cheap form of coal. And after the war, they were rationing everything because they had so little. And coal was one of the things that they rationed very heavily. So the people who couldn't afford, good coal afforded nutty slack. And nutty slack was basically just pouring out the smoke, very little heat. So you had the same kind of thing, but with many, many more people. The latest research is that as many as 12,000 died in that 1952 smog in London. We were lucky to only have the 21, not counting all the people who died later. That's a different statistic. But yeah, London was tough. And I think it was tough then because there were a lot of smokers there as well. And there were a great many more cars there, especially after the war, than there were during or before it. So it's a mix of activities and things that happened in history externally, well, not for London, and internally that caused sort of a great storm. And in the US, it happened in 48. And in London, it happened in 52. The interesting thing, it had happened in the Meuse Valley of Belgium in 1930. And yeah, Bill knows this because you read the book. It's and not that means anything. Meuse was very well known before that in the environmental community. But the same kind of thing happened there. The biggest manufacturer there was Prayon Metallurgical, which made steel and zinc. And it was an area between Huy, Huy, and Liège, Belgium, along the Meuse River. And what did they have? They had a river going along through heavily industrialized area, and the valley walls were very steep. And the top of the inversion layer was higher than any of the smokestacks, which happened exactly in that way in Donora. And I don't know whether I assume that the U.S. Steel people would have known about the Meuse tragedy, but they don't talk to people. They certainly never talked to me. They never talked to Deborah Davis. They never allowed any information out. But you'd think that they would keep an eye on those kinds of things. There were news stories throughout the U.S. about the 60 people who died there over a 5-day period. So, but again, so London was the biggest one. There's never been a larger one that I know of. I'm not sure we would hear about anything if it happened in China that was that big. China's a huge pollution area, air pollution. But Donora was it for us, and it changed everything for us.
One quick follow-up, and this hopefully is not getting too deeply into the woods. What is the cost difference, or what was the cost difference to a residential user of coal in a furnace between using crappy, smoky coal and higher quality coal?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have no idea. I didn't dig a lot into that for Donora because I was really focused on the mills. I talked about it, but I didn't talk about the price of it. So I'm sorry, I can't speak to that. I don't know if someone else can, but
sounds like a sequel.
Well, I'm a little far away from Donora right now in the book I'm writing now, but it'd be an interesting question. Yeah.
Dr. Neal, you wanted to say something, then I'll introduce Dr. Cloko McLean, who has joined us.
Yeah, I was actually the talk about China sort of got me thinking about two different things. I have had the great fortune of being able to travel around the world and visit a lot of places, and I think it's probably underappreciated, the air quality that we have in this country
Yeah.
compared to some other cities that I go to. Um, and it's even on a high mixing day, you could literally, the visibility is, kilometer or less. But it reminded me of being in grad school and taking air pollution, which was the hardest class I had. I totally got crushed. They needed, I think they needed 5 people to register so the class would be offered. And so I got roped into it, even though I didn't have the prerequisite, which was turbulence. And I don't think he's teaching anymore, but his book, S. Paul Aria, Air Pollution, Meteorology, and Dispersion, is still on Amazon. And I got a B plus in that class, which I think was a mercy grade, just because I that I would take it, because I don't think I answered a single question right on any of the tests. But my question is probably more along the lines of in the time that I spend in these other countries, I see these people exposed to pollution day in and day out, walking the streets. And I'm wondering, even though we're talking about these catastrophic short-term events, what about like the long-term effects of stuff that you don't see every day? Like it may appear to be a completely blue sky clear day, but you would imagine there's some sort of underlying chronic exposure going on.
Oh, without question. And certainly the studies that have been done on air pollution from zinc mills and the studies on Donora, such as they were, was finding long-term pulmonary and cardiovascular and neurological issues, which you would expect. And in fact, many of the people who died during the smog, shortly after, and long-term after, almost all had cardiovascular and pulmonary disease. But it's interesting, today, the latest thing is the microplastics that are being found in us, inside our body. It's just been sitting there. So the long-term consequences of air pollution, particularly with the kinds of chemicals that have been put out, never mind the zinc, the benzenes, and well, you guys know all about them, all the other, the sulfur compounds and the oxides. It's just horrendous. It's amazing to me that we don't die sooner from the particulate matter and all these other chemicals. So the body does a really good job. And I look at the poor people in New Delhi and Delhi, which is even worse, and I think how. I quote somebody I talked with. I didn't talk with. I got a quote from a newspaper. She was an environmental scientist, and she would look outside, and if it was foggy at all, she'd wear a mask all day, all night. She would only go out without a mask if it was a completely blue sky. And even then, she hoped to live past 30. I can't imagine those people in these highly polluted areas. People in Los Angeles, the asthma out there, the chronic obstructive disease out there, lung disease, it's rampant. So those things that we saw immediately after Donora, the first 15, 20 years, you see on a macrocosm throughout the world. And they're still around, and we're still finding out about those things, microplastics included. That was a shocker to me, but
That real quick. Yeah, that's the thing that worries me, Andy, is that because we're increasingly seeing that as a problem. I remember my mother standing over me in the third grade while I was typing a report on the dangers of smoking as she smoked a pack of Salem's, so, they had no idea, and it took her life at an early age. Dr. Neal, you had sort of a similar experience with your dad, didn't you? Not with cigarettes, but with other.
No, well, I mean, he was a fighter pilot, and pretty much everyone else in his squadron was lost in Vietnam, and he was shot down himself. But he was fortunate enough to live into his 70s, but died from leukemia that they linked to benzene exposure, which is just a byproduct of jet fuel, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
I'm sorry.
it's just terrible. Dr. Kim Clocko McLean, so glad you can join us tonight. We've got Andy McPhee, the author of this fabulous book on Donora, Pennsylvania. And you said, did we already cover the event in the first 20 minutes? No, we're going to go back and really talk about it now. But how are you tonight, Kim?
I'm doing great, and sorry to be a little bit late. It's another kid juggle kind of night, but I'm really excited that we're delving into a topic like this. I think we tend to, in our field, linger on the hazards that are so visible. And even when smog is visible, it still doesn't register in people's minds necessarily for just how impactful it could be. And it's the long-term effects of repeated exposures that really give rise to some of the greatest impacts of any airborne hazards that we see. So this intersection between man's industrial activities and the atmosphere is just a really important thing. Thank you, Andy, for your great work and
My pleasure.
being
Thank you.
here. And I'm so excited that I get to be here to get through the event that you wrote about as well.
Thank you.
So Uncle Andy, you write on your website, writing someone's story since 1983.
Right.
That's a lot of stories. So Uncle Andy, tell us some stories tonight. And I want to start out with sort of you touched on the geography, but talk about the geography and the history of Donora and that region.
Well, let's do the history first, and then it gets into the geography. The Donora was started by a guy named William Donner, who actually made his money in natural gas in Indiana. But he wanted to come west, and he wanted to get into tin plate, and he was scoping out the Monongahela Valley, but also all around Pittsburgh. And he initially was going to go to Monessen, but settled on, making a long story short, settled on Donora. And he and Andrew Mellon began buying up, and his brother Richard, of course, was behind the scenes, buying up land in what was called at the time West Columbia. It became Donora. Donora, it's an odd horseshoe curve, and you don't find very many of them in larger rivers. The Monongahela is a north-flowing river, as you know, and this is a really quite tight horseshoe curve. The walls are steep. They go up to about 450 feet on the east side, a little less on the west side. It's very steep in the beginning, but then it rounds off towards the top, but the height is still there. And that created in 48 a bowl where you couldn't get, first there weren't any breezes really, but there was no north-south breeze because the horseshoe cut it off. And the smoke that was emitted from the smokestacks throughout Donora, throughout the entire period of the smog, couldn't get above the inversion layer, which bottomed out at 250 feet. Smokestacks were 150 feet high. They shouldn't have been 150 feet high, but that's how they were from 1950 when they built them. You guys, I'm sure, know about the Anaconda stack in Montana, and there are many other smokestacks in valleys that were much higher than 150 feet, and Donora should have, looking back, made those smokestacks much higher, but they didn't. So it's a natural basin, really, that this thing could happen. Now, one of the stories that I learned, I got a lot of the information on what happened to the people from two writers. One was a guy named Bill Davidson, who wound up becoming a writer of celebrities. He wrote stories about celebrities. And the other guy was from the New Yorker. I'll come back to him in a minute. Bill Davidson wrote an article for Collier's magazine. No, first one was Collier's. I think it was, but I'm not sure. Don't hold me to that one. And he talked about air pollution. And now he probably wrote that in August, maybe September. But it got published 3 days after the Donora episode. And in it, he said, in this article that he'd written before the Donora episode. It's a wonder we haven't had that kind of, it's talking about the Muse tragedy. It's a wonder we haven't had that kind of a tragedy here. Leave it to Americans to do something dumb like that and pay no attention to what happened in 1930. Comes out days later. He wound up doing a follow-up to that. Very good story talking about the people. It's like, whoa, very interesting, these little coincidences. You asked also about more about the history of Donora. This is what, it was a town that was built just to make steel. That's all. There were like a dozen people living in the whole area beforehand. So everybody who came to make steel or zinc once the zinc worked open. Excuse me. Oof. So steel or zinc. There was a fairly large population of Spanish workers because in the Asturias region of northern Spain, there are a great many zinc mills. And there were these young guys who'd worked the zinc mills growing up as teenagers, wanted to come to the US in the 20s and 30s, and they came either to Donora. Well, I said it's not like two places only, but a big area was Donora, and another area was the tri-state region of Oklahoma, Missouri, and the other one. Yeah. Anyway, so a lot of that was a big zinc mining district. When they went sort of bust at the Great Depression, many of them moved to Donora, where it was still going strong. So the town of Donora, there isn't a Spanish section or a German section or a Polish section or Czechoslovakian or anything like that, because they came and found wherever they could find. And that's how it worked. There's a fairly strong, or there was a Spanish community in northern Donora, because that was one of the last areas to be settled from Donora. But otherwise, people mixed in all over the place. And for the most part, they got along okay. There apparently weren't very many fights, except for sometimes down at the Bucket o' Blood. The Bucket o' Blood was a bar.
Show title.
Off of the 10th Street gate that would attract mill workers heading up the hill, heading to go home. And it was known for its beer and fights. And they'd go, "You going to the Bucket tonight?" It's like, okay, a lot of fights there, but mostly people got along. One of the things I found interesting that I found out after the book came out was a surprise to a number of people who lived in Donora and grew up in Donora. The subtle form of racism that was there. Now, I talked to Reggie Jackson, who's a U.S. district court in Washington, D.C. Lovely guy. Grew up in Donora. Talked to several other people, and they told me that, well, nobody talked about it, but we all knew what to do. Our parents had told us, or we just found out. We knew that at the Piggly Wiggly, we could go roller skating, and Wednesday was our day. And our movie night was Friday night in Monongahela. They had certain nights, that they could go, the blacks could go. And I tell a story about a guy named Preston, who really liked this little girl in high school. They were sweet on each other. And so they danced together one night at a school dance. And the next day, all hell broke loose. She was never allowed to go back and forth to school again without someone with her, because she danced with a black boy. And he learned his lesson too. His mother about cracked him upside the head. It was that kind of racism. There was also there were a number of Jewish people. It was not a big Jewish community, but there were a number, and they faced discrimination as well. Though less, it was just back in those days. It was more subtle. You didn't even think about. Well, we didn't think about. We're white, Why would we think about it?
Mhm.
But it happened in Donora just like it happened every place else. I got other stories if you want to hear them.
Oh, we're gonna hear them all. Kim, did
Okay.
you want to mention something right there about some of the towns in Oklahoma that have suffered similar type fates?
Well, I just think it's interesting to think about what was happening in Donora in the context of, sort of a national network of production. So there were many towns where the resource was available and there wasn't necessarily a lot of thought paid to the well-being of the people who worked there, lived there, the occupants.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's definitely a story of Oklahoma. There's a town named Pitcher that actually was still occupied, though with dwindling numbers, until the Mother's Day tornado in 2008 that tore up downtown. And there had already been sort of I worked at the Oklahoma Climate Survey at the time, and they knew the environmental catastrophe that was. I think it had been declared a Superfund site. All the piles of chat, they're like these little mountains where you know, they take out, they would extract from the ground and then take out the ore and then leave the piles that still had, remnant chemicals all over them to just leach back into the soil. And at the same time as the water around everything was polluted, then the air also was. And also, it just is set up to collapse. It could fall in on itself at any point. So the tornado, in some ways, was a blessing for the people. They, in some cases, actually had they got bought out. The town was evacuated, and so was the town adjoining it in Kansas, Treese. And if you can still drive through, though, on I think it's State Highway 7 that takes you up there and into Kansas, and it is a really interesting testament to what you're talking about. The decisions that you're going to discuss that were made so many decades ago, they still are with us, and we still have to live with it. And that's certainly the case for the people of that community. I knew people who grew up there. They would sled down those chat piles, and the incidence of cancer in those communities is unbelievable. And so they all sort of know what they're living with. It's like a ticking clock. And they just weren't told. They didn't know. A lot of it was they didn't know. But yeah, it's interesting in light of what you're going to discuss, just to think about how many communities, even in our own country, that was happening in at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. Donora is so prevalent. You can walk around down by the river in Donora, walk along where the now industrial park is along the river, and you can pick up slag pieces all over the place because the entire riverbank had been built up with slag being the byproduct of steel process. And they would dump, there was a slag dump north of Donora, and they just dumped molten slag over and built up and built up and built up. Well, Palmer Park sits on that now. It's the main beautiful park for the Donora and area residents. It's lovely, but it sits on top of a slag pile. And they built roads out of slag in Donora. That was part of what the asphalt was. They are inert, but we don't know the long-term effects of that. They're supposedly inert. And there's still stuff going on that where those items might still be emitting, particularly when it gets wet and all that. They're leaching some of their chemicals and toxins. So that's still, and let's talk about a Superfund site. Donora is not a Superfund site, but it's the same kind of thing. All these chemicals, toxins leach into the water, leach into the soil, and then you eat the plants from them. You drink the water, filtered or not. It's a huge issue, and Donora is no different in that regard at all. The U.S. Steel is interesting in that way. We talked before about how they treated their workers, and they really treated them as chattel, and as many companies did. I can't tell you how many people said if you got injured, if you burned your hand, you cut your foot or whatever, you worked, you're going back to work. You had to be really, really sick or dead or cut your foot off and there were those things that happened as well. But otherwise, you went back to work, and it was like there's nothing. That's what you're supposed to do. The only difference was for the workers in the zinc mill who dealt directly with a couple of specific processes. They would be prone because they were exposed so much to zinc and zinc oxides. They'd get the zinc jitters, which is flu-like symptoms, shaking, and you feel like you're freezing, even though you don't have a temperature, and it's coughing, it's headaches, malaise, and it would happen Monday through Friday. They worked 4 hours at a time, so they'd come in for a 4-hour shift and then go home. On the weekend, they'd feel much better. Then they'd come back in on Monday, get sick all over again. That happened week in and week out with these particular zinc workers. I don't know how they did it, but I will tell you that many of the jobs in the mills, not just in Donora but elsewhere, were self-selected. If you couldn't take the heat, you didn't work in a blast furnace or close to the heat, and they'd learn that very quickly. If you could take the heat, or if you could take the very physical, demanding labor that some of these jobs did, then you did. And many of them were strong guys. They're almost all men. So they self-selected not just for strength. Couldn't have been. They had to have the temperament as well to be able to perform those functions. One of them was being a roaster's helper. Oh my God. A roaster is, think of a hamburger, and inside there is a roast. And these roaster helpers had to go stick a long rake sort of thing in and mix up. We're talking 3,500, 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's right there, and they'd have to come out after 20 seconds, and another one would go in and rake. In unimaginable toil. And that's what made the country. But yeah, the dangers of the work, those days that they worked, and then long-term stuff, they were never out of danger, really. It's amazing more of them didn't die. I don't know if I covered that.
You did. James A., did you want to mention something there?
Yeah, a real good friend of mine is a graduate of Pitcher High School, and Kim's 100% right. And the first time I saw those chat piles was from a general aviation airplane. And as you get closer and you're wondering what those weird white splotches are, and then you realize they're just big piles of chat.
Wow.
But I mean, still there, and see them if you know where to look. You can see them not pretty much miles from Pitcher, and so far he's healthy. I mean, but
are they in the poor areas of
very
town?
much.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and the tornado kind of wiped out the only part of town that was still kind of viable. That I think they were in the process of closing the school, even at that point. But it was a super fun site. And Southeast Kansas, Galena, oddly enough, town name after a metal. And then some coal mining in Southeast Oklahoma too, but nothing to that scale.
Yeah.
So Andy, you mentioned how companies treated their workers, and I'm reminded of the Tennessee Ernie Ford song, 16 tons, owe my soul to the company store. Talk about the significance of the term cement city and how this town was laid out and how it came to be.
The town was originally laid out by oh God.
Edison?
No, Edison came along later. It was a guy who ran down on his horse. He rode down the mountain in Johnstown and told people to stay away.
Yeah,
during the Johnstown flood, before the Johnstown flood. And he was hired by Andrew Mellon to lay out the town. Streets go east-west, and avenues go north-south. So the main avenues are Meldon and McCain. The and it was all upsloped, of course. So some of these roads are really weird. You have to work your way down, your way down the hill because they're so steep. Cars couldn't go up in one car, the Fifth Street stairs. They closed it down because it was too steep for cars to go. The layout of the town and the way the town was brought up was sort of designed to be a company town. I forget the second part of your question, Bill, but I'll come back to it and you can remind me. They didn't want a company. They wanted all the money spent in the town, but unlike other company towns, the real company towns, they didn't want the money coming back to them. So they were paying their workers. The workers would spend it in town. So it was a bit more fair than some other company towns. But nonetheless, Donner set up the whole community structure, the government of the town. The banks were very heavily involved early on, and they stayed heavily involved for many, many years. It was a town that was run by U.S. Steel, and you did not dare say anything against them because, well, that's where your money came from. And I know one of the most common questions is, well, why didn't they speak up? Why didn't they say something? Well, first, during the smog, they couldn't hardly get out of town unless they had left early. But they would never have said anything, or most of them never said anything, because they didn't want their jobs cut. They didn't want to be fired. They didn't want to be suspended. Their livelihood, their family, their life depended on the jobs in the mills. So it's kind of hard put to say anything bad against U.S. Steel. Later on, yeah, many people, especially the sons and daughters of the people who were really involved in the smog, were hugely upset and angry, furious with U.S. Steel, and remain so to this day. Billy, the second part of the question, I don't remember what it
Yeah,
was.
about Cement City
Cement City,
and
fabulous.
building the houses out of concrete.
They ran into in 1920. They ran into in the late teens. They ran into housing crisis. There weren't enough houses, apartments, hotel rooms for the number of people who were coming to Donora to work in the zinc mill and the increasing in size steel mills. So they looked to Thomas Edison, who had been building in New Jersey cement houses. And I mean cement because he used Portland cement. The term cement really is reserved for Portland cement. The term for every other kind of cement is concrete. But he used Portland cement, or at least his own version of it. And they built dozens and dozens of homes on the hill on the slightly southern side of Donora with cranes and a sort of a form. They'd build a form, pour the cement, take the form off, go to the next house, build the form. It got to be they built the first several houses like this has taken forever. We have to change the forms themselves, which they did, and bring in more workers now. So they completed it in a ridiculous amount of time, about 3.5 years, I think. And it's called Cement City. And if you go to any home in Cement City, they often have tours. The Historical Society holds tours every fall, I think, and they'll tour a Cement City home. It literally is all made out of cement. So it's great in the winter, warm as can be. Great in the summer, cool as can be. But don't think for a minute that you're going to knock out that wall and expand the living room. You're going to put a new door in for the basement. You're not going to do any such thing. It'll take you weeks and weeks to break through this cement. So the people who live in Cement City, they love the history there, I think. They like it doesn't take much heat or air conditioning to cool it. There are no driveways. That house is what it is. And they're still standing. They're still doing fabulously well. There are cracks and things, and it's expensive to get things repaired. But the house is going to last forever. So that's a big plus. So anyway, so those houses initially were for the managers of the mills, and they handed those out to middle managers and above. And it was an area that kids didn't go into Cement City. No. That was for the upper crust. Kids of the lower class, no, get away. And there are stories about Stan Musial as a kid running through Cement City and getting yelled at. And he didn't flip him the bird, but he made it clear that it didn't make any difference. He was going to do what he wanted to do. And Donora is the home of Stan Musial, if you didn't know that. There's some great stories about Stan living there. And he never forgot it. He would come back and visit Cement City and a number of the bars and restaurants downtown. So Cement City is still a source of great pride for the Denorans. And Mark and Brian have done worked with the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh on memorials sort of to Cement City. Not memorials, you know. I'm a wordsmith, so words are my life. Not talking, writing. Where I can use, I remember what that word was. I'll find it. Museum pieces and such. So yeah, it's a source of immense pride today, and you can drive around there, and it's great.
Yeah, Kim. I think all these poured in place concrete homes, we could have those in the South in Tornado Alley. That would be a fabulous thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that sort of feels like the dream down there. Let's just build everyone a concrete bunker and everything will be fine. Although I suspect as the story goes on, it'll be interesting to hear how those bunkers fare in other situations. I can't imagine. Not that I know a lot about this particular, like the thermodynamic properties of this particular cement, but I can't imagine that it's the most comfy, cozy of materials to build a house
No. These are not big houses inside because the walls, as you can imagine, are pretty thick. It's 8 inches, 10 inches of cement. Doesn't leave a whole lot of room inside, and so yeah, when you design a cement house, concrete house, whatever it is, make sure it's designed well, because you're not going to change it later. We had neighbors across the street where I lived in Pennsylvania who bartered for their home, and it's all poured concrete, so it's fabulous. But they can build outside. They can't do anything. They can't put another addition on. No, they're done.
Oh, and James A has already weighed in there because hanging pictures will take a hammer drill. That would be hard.
It would, yes.
A quick hello to Bruce Jones from Midland Radio, who's joining us. Bruce, we're talking to Andy McPhee tonight, who's got a fabulous book on the 1948 Donora smog event. So welcome to the show. We'll be talking to you in just a second. We really haven't gotten to the main part. Andy, talk to us about October 26th. What it was like, what the weather was like, how it changed.
Yes.
And I want you to tell us, if you don't mind, who was Donnie Dingbat?
Well, let's start with the smog. So October 26th is generally considered to be the official start of the smog, because that's when the weather started to change, the temperature started to change. And Wednesday was just any other day in Donora. Thursday was a little darker. By Friday morning, and this is where Donnie Dingbat comes in. Donnie Dingbat was a leftover World War II cartoon for the Pittsburgh Press. Roosevelt had decreed that no weather forecast of any kind could be sent out in a newspaper or in a radio that had any kind of details about what the actual weather was, because he was afraid that it would help the Germans, or Japanese, but mostly the Germans at that time, fly over and they're going to have good weather here, we'll go there. So Pittsburgh Press the publisher gave a job to this cartoonist, and they said, listen, see if you could do something that sort of hints at the weather, but doesn't say anything, stayed away from Roosevelt's decree. And so he came up within about a half an hour, this bird that he called Donnie Dingbat. And every morning, Donnie Dingbat would talk in a way about the weather. Oh boy, Donnie's boots are really wet today. Maybe they'll dry up by this afternoon. Those kinds of things. And Donnie Dingbat mentioned the fog, increasing fog in Pittsburgh, speaking specifically about the fog. Not that that was unusual in Pittsburgh either. Pittsburgh's also a valley town, but it's much, much bigger. But in any case, Donnie Dingbat talked about the weather. And he lasted until, I want to say, somewhere in the late 50s, when he just sort of, okay, enough with Donnie. We can actually talk about the weather. But he was quite a character. So in Donora, so it starts on the Wednesday, October 26th, and this officially. Thursday, it's a little stronger, not bad. These people are not worried about it. Friday morning, they wake up and people are looking at it like, boy, this seems to be really thick. One of the women I talk about was a receptionist for a couple of physicians. Her name was Helen Stack, and who became a nurse actually, and nursed for many years. But she was working in the front office, and she came in that morning, and the desk and the chairs and everything was covered with this black, grimy, soot-like stuff, and she never had that before. She thought that was weird, but she heard outside the workers in the street getting ready for the Halloween parade. So they're hanging banners or whatever it is they did for the Halloween parade. She said, well, if the Halloween parade comes off, is it supposed to come off? That's going to be tonight. So if they're putting up the banners and things, I guess it'll be fine. So she went about her business. There were signs with the physicians and with some calls that people were getting edgy and becoming concerned. They were coughing more. Their older family members felt sick and very, very tired, and they're just not breathing well. And the doctors were out on their rounds. One physician, I want to say it was Saturday, but William Kohler, got terribly sick himself. He's a cigar smoker. Ralph Kohler, and he's a cigar smoker. He just couldn't, oh my God, it made him sick. Helen Stack was a cigarette smoker, and she couldn't stand the taste of cigarettes. So people were beginning to feel it. Friday night gets much worse, although the Halloween parade went on. They marched down McCain Avenue as they always did. Couldn't see the other side of the street, could barely see the people marching by. There was a young girl whose father had fixed up a flashlight as a kind of a wand. She's a little princess, and they could see the light walking down the street. That's how thick it was downtown. As soon as it finished, as soon as the parade marched by, they left. People left. They got home as quickly as possible. The nighttime after midnight, which was Saturday morning, but you think of it kind of as Friday night, but it was Saturday morning, that's when people started to die. And the first person who recognized that something was going on was one of the morticians, a very busy mortician named Rudolph Schwerha, Schwerha, and I think I pronounced that right. And he picked up a body. Took a while to get there. He and his driver went, and it took him quite a while to get back because it almost ran off the road. He had to send his driver out front to kind of walk along, feel his way, and they finally got back. And once they got back, as he's driving into the driveway, he sees his wife standing at the door, and he finds out, holy mackerel, there's another one dead. And he went out for that one, and by the time he got back, there were two more. So people really started to die Friday night, and there were, I want to say 7, maybe only 6. Saturday daytime, people started dying all along the whole clock, every hour, basically, every couple of hours. There was a football game Saturdays, widely popular contest between the Monongahela Wildcats and the Donora Dragons. Donora was favored, absolutely favored. They were a huge team, big guys, and They had a great squad, and but Monongahela beat them 27-6. And one of the stories that came out of that was that a man named Stanley Sawa, S-A-W-A, got notified over the loudspeaker that his dad was sick, and he ran down the hill, and to find that he was too late, his dad had died. The story is completely false. It's been a myth in Donora for 50 years. It's false. Stan's father actually died 3 years beforehand, and Stanley was called down to a game where his father was sick. So stories got conflated. Stanley scored the 6 points for Donora. But in any case, stories differ. Perceptions differ about how much you could see during that game. Some people claim they could see pretty much everything, even though it was very, very foggy. And others said you couldn't see the ball, they'd kick it, and you have no idea where it went. Keep in mind that this is at the top of the hill in Donora, at the old Donora High School. And it would have been lighter there. The greatest concentration of the particulate matter in the fog would have been at the base, which is why one of the reasons Dr. William Rongus, who was a huge hero of the day, was sending people go up to the top of the hill if you can at all can. If you can't get out of town, go up top. And that probably saved a number of people. Who knows how many. So Saturday, it just became increasingly worse. Now, U.S. Steel knew about it. They had been asked to bank the furnaces that day. The M.M. Neal, I'm very aware in time. Okay. M.M. Neal was the supervisor of the zinc works. And the mayor of the town, the Burgess, August Chambon, had asked him, listen, you got to bank the furnaces. What that means is you reduce the amount of raw product you're putting in so that it slows the processing down. You can't shut off a zinc mill or a steel mill abruptly. The crash of the temperature would literally blow up the furnaces. But he didn't bank them. He went out and walked around the building, and he saw the smoke leaving the chimney just as it always did, which is surprising because Ralph Kohler was in his bathroom Friday morning looking at the smoke down at the railroad track, the smoke coming out of the engines, and it didn't go up. It ran down the side like oil, he said. It just went right over the side and along the ground. He thought that was very odd. So the smokestacks couldn't have been putting out the smoke like there was, but that's what he said. Fine. He did the same thing Saturday night. He didn't bank the furnaces until he was told by Pittsburgh at 6 o'clock in the morning, all right, start banking the furnaces. But by that time, most of it was over. In any case, Saturday, more and more deaths, more and more people dying. The physicians were running all over the place, giving out adrenaline as a shot, giving out aminophylline tablets or theophylline tablets, which is something to open up the airways, to as many people as they could until they ran out. Pharmacists were giving out cough syrup like you read about. Anything that they thought could help, they were giving the people. I talked with one who's since passed away, unfortunately, Rosemary Iams, and she was one of the pharmacists. She said, we were really, really busy, but I didn't think the smoke was that bad. I walked up and down the hill. Okay. And she did. She walked up and down went down in the morning, up for lunch, down after lunch, back up after work. And that's what they all did. But in any case, by Saturday night, the difficulty in walking around was absolutely mind-boggling. One of the firefighters in town, Bill Shemp, had to crawl along with his oxygen tank, then feel his way with the curbside, the telephone poles, and try to figure out where he was. He knew the town really, really well, but it took him forever to get from house to house. And the firefighters would give oxygen shots, what they call shots of oxygen. One of the firefighters, Russell Davis, would try to get a sheet or something and put it over the person's head like an oxygen tank and give them 10, 15, 20 seconds of oxygen under there. That's all. Bill Shemp gave them what he called shots of oxygen, where he just put the mask on and he'd give them, a minute of that, 30 seconds of that. And then they had to go on. And I tried to put myself in that situation. You know, as an emergency room nurse, a critical care nurse, it's like somebody needs oxygen, you give them oxygen, turn the valve, put the thing on or the mask, whatever it is, and off they go, and you can have as much of that as you want. These guys had to say, I can't give you any more than that because it's too far to go to get another oxygen tank. I only have these two. I'll give you this what I can. And then he'd go on. And I can't imagine the people leaving that he left. Their loved one just starts to feel better. Okay, I got a bit of a breath. But I think those shots of oxygen were enough to get them by a critical area. I think they probably saved dozens and dozens and dozens of lives then. It's just a guess. The adrenaline shots that the doctors gave, that would have helped absolutely, but adrenaline doesn't last that long. It's out of the blood system within a couple of hours. The theophylline lasts much longer, but that's only 6 or 7 hours. So we're still talking a short period of time to have some relief. So, but I think it was enough for many, many people to get them through the smog. So Sunday morning comes and there are a few more deaths. This is the first time that they've set up an emergency center. They set it up in the back of a building, a morgue, and they set up the emergency. The morgue is in the back. The emergency building was in like a hotel across from the smog museum today. And they saw 2 patients. One of them was brought in by ambulance who had died already, and 1 or 2 other people who had cough and things. But by that time, it was already, the fog was beginning to clear. The toxins were beginning to clear. And by noon or sometime early afternoon, that part is unclear. But in any case, a rain came in. I think the rain came in probably around 12, 1, 2 o'clock, right in there. There are other sources that say it came in the morning. I'm not sure looking at the weather patterns, but in any case, rain came in and busted everything up. And that was the end of that. Bill Rongus was the most outspoken physician of all of the physicians. He was the youngest one. He always looked out for the underdog, and there are reasons about that I talk about in the book. But he was adamant that this is the problem of the zinc mill. They have been killing our people. He called it murder at the mill, and it sort of was. So, and Rongus maintained his practice in Donora for the rest of his life. So U.S. Steel couldn't kill his practice. He did very, very well for himself. So that's based. Those 6 days constituted a crisis that the country never knew about until Saturday night, when Walter Winchell broadcasted a little message that said, you know, hey, there's stuff going on in Donora. People are dropping dead from this deadly fog. They didn't call it smog yet. That didn't get into vogue until much later. But that's when the phones started ringing off the hook. Never mind the phones for patients calling doctors and ambulances and the hospital and nurses, but outsiders calling in to find out if their relatives are okay. Very, very busy time. I know I'm very close to the time, so I'll stop there.
You're awfully sweet to observe our time, Andy, but we don't generally observe it either. But Jen Nairmore, you wanted to talk about cause of death.
This is so awful. And I knew vaguely about the event, but to hear the details, it's so sad. But I'm taken aback by what seems to be the sudden deaths. You know, it seemed very acute. Obviously, there were folks that had underlying issues that probably exacerbated things. But what was the official cause of the deaths?
The official cause of death.
Was it like an asphyxiation? Was it? I'm trying to figure it out.
No. Only a physician mentioned the word smog. So all of because they didn't want to, it was anathema to say anything like that. So the vast majority of the diagnoses were things along the line of asthma and coronary heart disease, what we call cardiovascular disease now, although coronary heart disease is coronary artery disease, we still call. COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, although they often said COLD. They said cardiac asthma, which is another thing for acute heart failure. Heart failure was another diagnosis. Often they were clumped. MI, I saw a number of times, myocardial infarction, a heart attack. They were all cardiovascular, cardiopulmonary events that never mentioned the smog except for this one. Yeah, there were some underlying problems. If you were working in a steel mill, zinc mill, anywhere in that whole town, and we were exposed to the number of an amount of toxins that these people we're talking about 30,000 pounds of zinc oxides put out a day at that period of time. Hundreds and hundreds of pounds of sulfur dioxide, of the sulfur oxides. I mean, it's enormous quantities. So if you're living in that, you're going to have cardiovascular disease. If you're a smoker, and so many of them were, although there are no specific statistics about Donora, so many were, you're going to have pulmonary issues. You're going to have fibrosis. You're going to have issues with obstructive disease in the lower lungs. So that was going to be there anyway. But it wasn't just old people. The ages range from 52 to mid 80s. The mid 80s, I can understand that. They just didn't have enough strength, body strength, enough stores to last. The 52-year-old and even a 60-some-odd-year-old had no prior disease that we know about. One of them was Susan Donora. Now, Susan is a little more well-known because her family, she was 62, I believe. Her family sued after. So there are depositions of the members of the Donora family, including her husband, John, who could barely speak English. And Bill Rongus talked about it. So we know a lot about Susan Donora. Susan had no health disease of any kind before that any physician had noticed or diagnosed. So she's what we can assume is a reasonably healthy 62-year-old for the area. And it just got to her so bad that she could no longer function. She couldn't get enough oxygen. All of the deaths, if you look at them, all basically said the same thing. These people were overwhelmingly overwhelmed by probably carbon monoxide, the zinc oxides and all the effect they had, and the sulfur oxides. And they all bind to oxygen in different ways. And those effects lead to the pulmonary aspects, disorders that we found in all these patients. The latest one, there were people who died after the smog happened, including one who died about a week later, November 8th, and another one died in December. Epidemiologists say that after an event like this, they give 40 days. It's a 40-day window that you can say that a person's death is directly related to that environmental effect in air, anyway, air pollution. So he died within those 40 days. But there are a number of people, including Stan Musial's father, apparently, who died the following, I want to say February, might be January, but he died well after the 40 days. He died from the smog, probably, but not in the smog. And that was a determination I had to make very early on to try to get the correct victim count, which was very important to me because there had been any number of accounts in the newspapers and the journals and the magazines that the numbers were all over the place. And there's a plaque in Donora to this day that lists 27 victims. Several of them lived through the smog. So but how that came to be was more political than it was scientific, certainly. But yeah, 21 people altogether. Yeah, the tough period. I forget where I was going with this. Well, I can't remember. You'll have to ask me another question.
No, you answered that perfectly.
Okay.
I was just the cause of death. And I wanted to stop you and I want to say how much I respect what you just said about getting the the fatalities correct and honoring the lives of those lost. That's very, very important to me as well with tornadoes,
Thank you. Yeah.
tornado history. So thank
Yeah.
you for your heart and making sure that to the best of your ability, you can get that
Yeah,
right.
because these are the people, their names were in the papers after the smog and in the articles, and I mean, they gave their lives for what we're breathing now.
That's right.
And so I dedicate the book to them, along with my wife, who's in the other room. But the book, the book to them, her mostly, but the book, the victims for the book, because I don't want to forget those, and I don't think we should forget them. Yeah, so thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Dr. Neil Jacobs.
Well, I guess I had a question that was kind of similar to Jen's. It was along the lines of the demographics, comorbidities, and if there was any kind of correlation to that. And we were just discussing some things in a chat, and I mentioned this experience I had on a commercial airline, and so I feel like maybe this is time for the weekly near-death experience story. So I was on a plane. This is probably 15 years ago, and it lost pressure, and it was pretty obvious who was suffering and who, I'm assuming if you normalize this for your typical panic level, because the oxygen content in the cabin dropped pretty quick.
Yes.
And there were people in there who I thought, if we don't get down to a couple thousand feet above sea level, they might not make it. And then there was other people who were like, what's going on? Why are we descending so fast? My ears just popped, but otherwise I feel fine. Which was scary. Everything fine, nothing happened. We landed. The funny part of the story is apparently it was a door seal. And they're calling some mechanics. They get some people out there, and this mechanic shows up. And I'm not naming the airlines. I'm not even going to name the country. But the mechanic boards the plane with a roll of duct tape, and he's like, "We'll get it fixed. No, don't worry about it." And everyone on the plane lost their minds. They're like, "No way! Let me off. You're not, whatever that was, you're not fixing it with duct tape." And
duct tape is an excellent product.
It is. All planes should carry duct tape.
Yes.
Maybe Flex Seal if they didn't have any.
So
wow.
This is, as scary as this is what the mechanic did. He actually took the duct tape inside out and smudged it along the seal of the door to sort of pull off the dust and the grime and the gravel. And then it got a clean seal. Everything was fine. But yeah, that got a lot of people freaked out. But yeah, I guess maybe you largely answered the question that I had, which was, was there a correlation to comorbidities, or was there anyone who just looked like they had, absolute top fitness, high VO2, and still passed away?
Yeah, there were a couple of those who didn't have the comorbidities that we know of. But as I say, I suspect living in that area, if you reach 50, you almost couldn't help but have something. Yeah. The diabetes was another common thread, but not all the way through. But you're talking about robbing people of oxygen, and the death is not pleasant. It's that air hunger, that starvation that comes with a panic. And so I tried to put myself in these shoes, and eventually you just go to sleep. But before that, it is it's terrifying, as the people in the plane must have been terrified, because there's no way you can get that breath. A panic attack, when you think that way, if anybody's prone to panic attacks, it's the same thing. You're trying to get air and you just can't. Now, in a panic attack, if you hyperventilate, you wind up passing out eventually, and then you breathe normally and everything is fine. But before that, it is terrifying. And I can't imagine what some of these people went through. Again, eventually, once you're past the point of no return, the breaths get slower and slower, more and more shallow. And eventually the person goes to sleep, and then they pass away. but before that, it's not pleasant. That's for sure. But as far as again, I think everybody had something, and most of them absolutely did. And you can tell some of them, like this guy, has had lung cancer for a long time, or he's had 2 strokes, and he had another one probably that night, something like that. So a lot of you can pin on that, and that's what the company wanted. They said afterwards, many times, these people didn't die from the fumes from the smoke. They didn't. They died because they were sick, because they were old and they wouldn't have made it anyway. And it was convenient. And the study that was done afterwards by the United States Public Health Service pretty much said the same thing, although couched in scientific wording, meaning we can't determine with any degree of certainty how much of the person's declining health and final death was a result of the coal stoves, the smoking, the smoke from the chimneys, from his heart problems, from his lung problems, from her diabetes or whatever. So they kind of hid behind an understandable veil of medical uncertainty, because we didn't have that certainty then. We got it now, but we didn't have it then. We only had studies about those kinds of things, the effect on air pollution on health, after Truman's conference on anti-air pollution in 1950. So we're in a much different position today than we were then, just as our understanding of it.
So it's interesting. That historical piece is where I would love to go with this. So, okay, after this event, nothing immediately changes in the United States. We have this event where some air pollution event has probably caused deaths, but it's in a relatively small town. Maybe people don't completely believe what happened, or there's not a strong correlation drawn, whatever. Anybody who has watched The Crown, the series that details the life of our now past Queen Elizabeth, had seen an event that happened early in her career in London, in just shortly after this. So 4 years later, in London in 1952, there was a toxic smog event, and in that one, nearly 4,000 people died.
Actually, the latest research says it's probably closer to 12,000.
I don't doubt it. I would not be shocked if that was a drastic undercount. A lot of people died. I was curious. So I'll make a comment here, and then I'd love your historical reflection. The Clean Air Act that was passed, so in Europe, this stimulated a lot of public response. So they moved within just a few years to pass a Clean Air Act there. But it took us until the 1960s to do something similar.
55 was the first anti-air pollution legislation. It was called the Air Pollution Control Act of 1955. And then there were several amendments before the first Clean Air Act in 1970. But beforehand, there was no teeth. It was like, we need to study this. We need to look at this. You guys have to start looking at it. That's all it was. 70, the Clean Air Act of 70 had more teeth. The final, the one we have was signed in 1990 by Herbert Walker Bush, that had teeth in it. That's what really has made the last 30 years much cleaner, our air. So yeah, Europe, England, yeah, they passed laws fairly soon, but they didn't have any teeth either. And nothing really happened for decades. One of the interesting bits is that Donora has a historical society and smog museum on the main street in Donora. And London has no museum, and it's for 21 people. London has no museum to that horrendous smog, which killed at a minimum 4,000, but really what they're thinking is as many as 12,000. Interesting, I think, that correlation. So yeah, we did stuff and they did stuff. It took them longer actually to make a difference than it took us. I think now we're both about the same, but
yeah,
yeah.
Well, that's fascinating to hear, because they had a mass mortality event. So it's really while unevenly developed in time, the different legislation, it's interesting to think about, okay, so that happened back then. Do we have anything still to this day that we should be thinking about in terms of air pollution and how that affects populations? And while we did some of the big letter things to handle things like smog, after that, there were subsequent issues with, okay, so while we deal with point pollution for a particular community, you could still have things like acid rain that occur downstream of a place. And how do you regulate that? That was part of us dealing with our national acid rain problem in what, the 80s, 90s. And now today, and fascinatingly, I was at a workshop last week about wildfire and fire weather. And it was discussed that everything to do with fire management is handled locally today. But as we saw with the Canadian wildfires last year, all the health effects were downstream. And how are we going to handle, and especially a changing climate, when you can have a place where, all right, maybe locally we want to save the houses and things, and we'll just let all this wild nature burn to protect the assets, quote unquote assets. But downstream you have New York City, and Chicago, and millions and millions of people. I don't think we've escaped this today. I think
Oh God, no.
what you're talking about is still just such a relevant issue with only more layers as we go on in time.
Oh, you're absolutely right. We are so far from the end. It isn't, well, we're so far from the end of air pollution. I don't know about the end of Armageddon kind of a thing, but we're so far from the end. It's ridiculous. There's so much more to do. We're trying to get at it from one angle that makes political expediency. And it all comes out of politics, really, and money. And it's not just us; it's the world over. And the fact that most of the pollution now throughout the world comes from Asia and the Middle East doesn't make it any better, because we're all one planet, and everything mixes in everything else. So there's so much more we can do. My point has been, we're so much better off since Donora than we were before Donora. And that's a good thing. It's a good trend that we absolutely must continue, because we won't make it otherwise.
Hey, Andy, this is Bruce Jones.
Hi, Bruce.
Hi. Hey, I lived in Ankara. Well, I guess we Americans call it Ankara, Turkey, back in, I think it was 68 to 70. And Turkey, Ankara is in a bowl. It's down in a valley. And then we lived up on the top of one of the hills. But most of the apartment buildings were heated by coal. So you had a coal furnace down in the basement of your apartment building. That's where your heat came from. And during days with an inversion, we could look out over the valley there in Ankara, and it was all gone. It was covered by this really black cloud. So the American school bus would pick us up in the morning, and then as we drive downhill to go to you drive right down into it, and the sun would just disappear. And it was so thick that you could smell it. It's sulfurous.
Oh, yeah.
And you could taste it. And it was gritty. The air was gritty. You could open your mouth and you could have grit in your mouth because the coal pollution was so bad. Yeah.
And you had the bus drivers see once they get down.
Had to have your headlights on, had to
on.
drive pretty slow. It's like being in a heavy fog.
Yeah.
And, it would stick around until there was enough air movement to blow it out of there.
I've seen photographs of that kind of situation taken from above, and I think you probably experienced what the Donora Valley floor looked like from above, because you couldn't see it.
Yeah.
If you had a drone and flew it above, you wouldn't see anything. So I think you probably have a very good idea what it must have been like back in those days, or what it's like pretty much any day in the fall in New Delhi. We talked about that a little bit before, and I just can't imagine. Yeah, and you did that as you were a young man. You weren't a kid.
Eighth and ninth grade or something like that. Yeah. Yep.
So, Dr. Neal, did you run into Bruce was here carved in all sorts of things all over Ankara?
No, I lived in Ankara from 78 to 80, and I was pretty young, but I don't. Come to think of it, I don't really remember seeing the sun.
Oh, wow.
And maybe this is why.
Maybe.
Did you live down in the valley? Down in the
Yeah,
city?
yeah,
Oh,
we
okay,
were
yeah.
lower because I remember I could walk to school. So I wasn't on a bus, but yeah,
What
it was.
industry is there? What's the main industry causing all that? Or was it just a coal
I don't
being
I
grown?
guess it was just, I mean, my dad was there training Turkish fighter pilots, but I don't know what the industry was for the source of the smog, but it was pretty pretty intense. And I remember like during days when I didn't have school, um the woman who would look after me would take me to this chai garden behind the apartment building, and they would just have these open fires where they would just be cooking. And this is like in the middle of the city.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all they know. Andy McPhee, I love David McCullough. I love all of his books, and I saw figments of David McCullough
Thank you
in
very
your
much.
writing.
He's
I
my
hope
absolute
everybody.
favorite.
He is. The Johnstown Flood book was just superb, and I loved every book he ever wrote that I
Yes,
read after that one. But
I'm with you.
if everybody that's listening tonight, do yourself a favor and get a copy of this book because the writing is superb, and we've touched on so much tonight, and we appreciate you giving us so much time. It's so hard to make this show shorter. We're just gonna.
I lost him.
Uh-oh, I think we lost Bill's audio here. But real quick, Andy, thanks for your time. I wanted to ask one quick question,
Yeah.
not necessarily related to the book. What kind of nursing were you in, out of curiosity?
I did a whole bunch of things. I taught an LPN program for 10 years, and I did a lot of critical care. Started off in the emergency room. I wound up doing alcohol, drug detox. So I did a bit of everything. I never did obstetrics or
Okay.
pediatrics. No way was I dealing with the pregnant women, nor would they want me in that room. And I scared the kids because I had the beard. Although I
Fear the
had hair,
beard.
I had hair back then, but I had the beard, and they would take one look at me because I had students who took care of the kids, and they'd take one look at me and cry.
Wow.
So that was not a place for me. But otherwise, otherwise I did a lot.
So just is there a certain place where people can go to buy your books, or how can people go
So if you go to the
make
University
a
of Pittsburgh
purchase?
Press, you can get it there, but they're going to send it to Amazon. So if your favorite book seller is Amazon, go there. If it's on Kindle. If it's Barnes and Noble, you can go there. The main thing, just search for Donora Death Fog or Donora Fog or Donora for that matter. My book will come up in a few. There's an author called Kathleen Shoop, Shoop, who is a fiction author and has written several books with the base of Donora and Western Pennsylvania. So my book will come up if you just put Donora. It's a unique name. There's no other town named Donora in the world. It's
Wow.
a combination of William Donner's last name and Nora Mellon, who is Andrew Mellon's first wife, Don Nora. So nothing else is named like that. So just look up Donora and you'll be okay.
Awesome. Well, you were a great guest, Andy. Thank you so much for your time. We kept you 30 minutes past the time you told us
I don't
you
care.
did. So
I
thank
don't
you.
care.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very
It was
much.
great. Thank you so much for coming on the show this week.
My
All right,
pleasure.
guys, we have to pause real quick. We're going to hear from Tony Rice and his astronomy report. We're going to come back with Jen this week in tornado history. We're going to do an email, the email of the week. We'll have Bruce Jones, picks of the week, and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Thank you.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
This week, look for Venus and Mars to rise together in the eastern pre-dawn sky. If you're an early riser, you'll notice that ruddy Mars begins to approach from below and to the left of much brighter Venus, drawing closer until Thursday when the pair are separated by about a half a degree, or less than the width of your outstretched little finger. Take a moment to think about what you're looking at. Venus is a mere 220 million kilometers away, while Mars is another 110 plus million kilometers beyond that. You're looking out across the plane of the solar system. Now notice the rising sun to the left, or more easterly along the horizon. Elsewhere in the sky, this Saturday's full moon is special. While it's not a supermoon, you know, the full moon that gets all the attention, this is the supermoon's little brother, the mini-moon. Supermoons happen when the moon reaches full phase, near the point in its orbit nearest the Earth, also known as perigee. It's a little closer and thus a little bit bigger in the sky, and a little brighter as a result. Now, many moons happen as the moon reaches full phase near apogee, or that furthest part in its orbit, making it a little bit smaller in the sky and a little dimmer. So give the mini moon a little love this weekend. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hookie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, it was deemed the night of the tornadoes. The most deadly tornado outbreak in Florida history occurred during the nighttime hours of February 22nd and 23rd of 1998. A total of 7 tornadoes swept through the central parts of the state between 10:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 2:30 in the morning. The tornadoes were unusually extreme. 3 of the 7 were rated F3. A total of 42 people were killed and over 260 were injured. 3,000 structures were damaged and 700 were destroyed. The first tornado of this outbreak developed at 10:55 Eastern Time, 5 miles southwest of Daytona Beach along Route 92. 600 structures were damaged or destroyed. 1 person was killed in a mobile home. The second tornado of the outbreak was the first given an F3 rating. It moved 18 miles through Lake and Orange counties. A mobile home community was destroyed in Winter Garden. 3 people were killed. The same supercell that spawned the Winter Garden tornado produced another F3. It developed near the Longwood area in Seminole County at 12:10 in the morning. 12 people were killed in mobile homes and 70 were injured. Tornado number 4 was the deadliest of the outbreak and had the longest path length. This F3 developed 1 mile south of Intercession City in Osceola County. It moved to the northeast at 45 miles per hour, passing through the town of Kissimmee. The Morningside Acres mobile home community and the Ponderosa Recreational Vehicle Park were devastated. 25 people were killed, many in mobile homes. There were no injuries or fatalities with tornadoes 5, 6, and 7. Tornado number 5 was rated F2. It hit near Oak Hill, causing damage to mobile homes and 2 other houses. The last 2 tornadoes were both rated F1 and had short paths in Brevard County. We detail this entire event on our website at tornadotalk.com. Join the American Meteorological Society's Weather Band at amsweatherband.org to connect with weather enthusiasts all over the world, plus 10,000 plus members of the AMS. Swap stories and data, join photo contests and interactive webinars, or test your trivia knowledge. Full membership is just $12 per year. And don't forget to join WeatherBand February 29th and March the 1st from noon to 4 for the annual virtual Jamposium. As requested by WeatherBand members, the Jamposium will cover topics from climate change and severe weather to science communication, citizen science, and the April 2024 total solar eclipse. Go to amsweatherband.org to get started.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to dive into the email inbox. Maybe there's one in there this week.
We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
Yes, but first, Bill, I would like to ask about your snail mail first. And you're muted.
Hello?
He's still muted.
I was trying not to make noise while I was opening my mail.
Mhm.
But I got something really cool that James Spann will really appreciate. My friend David Chang mailed me a birthday present. It's stadium map art, James. These are 4 coasters, Major League Baseball stadiums, Atlanta.
Ooh. Wow.
And you'll appreciate this one.
Oh, yeah. Fenway.
And historic Yankee Stadium, the old stadium. And one that you do the weather from every Saturday during football season.
Wow.
The
Bryant Denny Stadium.
So
campus of the University of Alabama.
What a cool thing to open in the mail. So it's not email, Jen, but it'll count.
No, it does count. That's awesome. And our email of the week comes from Steve Holmes, and he wrote this the day after the Super Bowl because he said, "Greetings from Chiefs Kingdom." So I think we know who he was for. But his question was, most weather folk and emergency managers say public complacency returns anywhere from 1.5 years to 3 years after a disaster. How do you old heads, I'm not sure how I feel about being called an old head, feel that might have changed over the years? A book on the 1953 Waco tornado quotes Alan Pearson as saying in 1972 that the vigilant stage lasted about 10 years. What could have changed that? Any thoughts on that? Maybe Kim? Do you have thoughts on that?
It is a social science question.
It is.
Teenagers
Okay,
stop
sorry, repeat
listening
the
to their
question.
parents.
Bruce Jones weighs it.
Teenagers don't want to hear their parents talk about it anymore.
It could be.
I apologize. I was looking up my pick of the week, which is the upcoming segment. So I might need the question again.
Okay, so essentially, he's asking that he goes, most weather folk and emergency managers say public complacency returns anywhere from 1.5 to 3 years after a disaster. Back in 1953, Alan Pearson was quoted as saying in 1972 that the vigilant stage lasted about 10 years. So what has changed? Why is that shortened?
I will just say that the whole premise that there is complacency is very much disputed in the social science community today. And I think that that's a really limited way to look at how people are responding. Just because they don't take action as you would hope that they should doesn't mean that they're not really deeply processing what's going on. Every tornado survivor I've ever spoken with has been paying attention. I mean, even people who haven't been paying attention had really good reasons for articulating why they didn't believe that an alert was going to be personal for them, was meaningful for them. And statistically, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. We have to get over ourselves that there's a complacency issue. If you want to look up more about the complacency myth and disasters, just look up the late, great Dennis Milletti. He has quite a bit to say about this. Anyone that you see parroting that people are complacent or stupid in disasters, they're just not really a weather social scientist. So I think that I appreciate that it has to be so frustrating to see people not doing what you think that they ought. But I promise that if you dig into their decision contexts, you'll find a richness that you're not seeing. And so I will leave that there.
I was going to say it's because we only had 4 channels back then, but what do I know? Kim's answer was much better.
Yeah, that was amazing, Kim. Thank you so much for your insight and helping with that. And there's so much to learn, and we don't know. We don't know everything. We just need to we're supposed to just be helping folks and keeping them prepared. And we don't know why they make the decisions that they do. And that's why we try to dig into. That's why you do what you do, what I do. We dig and we want to help. That's the whole goal. So Steve, thank you for that question and for bringing that up for discussion. If you would like to have your email be the email of the week, then please shoot us that email at email@weatherbrains.com. And also, please don't forget the newsletter. You can sign up for that as well, and that comes into your inbox every Thursday morning. Go to our website. There's a little link there that says sign up for the newsletter. You can get that, again, every Thursday morning. Back to you, James Spann.
All right, let's toss it over to Bill Murray. Bill?
Oh, that's right. I have a spot to
Got to talk with Bruce, man. Come on.
Yeah.
Bruce. I called you. I wrote you way too early, Bruce, tonight. Thank you for joining us. I didn't know we still had 45 minutes of the guests left. We keep trying to shorten this show, but we're not doing a very good job of that. So, Bruce, it looks to me like you might be in a hotel room. Where are you tonight?
I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, for South Carolina Emergency Management.
Wow, you get around, Bruce.
Yeah. Next week I'll be in Nevada, for crying out loud.
I thought you were just in Nevada. Where were you last?
Colorado.
Colorado. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, I know you're going to be talking about weather radio while you're there.
Yep.
Talk about the latest and greatest discussions that you hear about the medium. It's such an important part of how we warn people. And you're the national ambassador for weather radio. What are you going to be talking about while you're there?
Well, a little bit of interest here in the fact that people are starting to talk about an active hurricane season with the ocean temperatures and with La Nina coming around, and how active is the season going to be? And then, what are the impacts going to be on South Carolina and North Carolina? So that's top of mind awareness here, and I'll be talking with some of the folks here about that. Interestingly, the NOAA Weather Radio Modernization Act of 2023 passed the Senate and the House, It's part of a Weather Modernization Act that's still being debated. But the good news is it had bipartisan support from politicians all across the United States who understand the importance of having the NOAA Weather Radio Network. So it means increased funding from NOAA for the current 1,033 transmitters. And then they're looking to improve the system by getting rid of the old copper phone lines. The NOAA Weather Radio broadcast goes from a National Weather Service forecast office through copper phone lines out to the transmitters. And the interesting thing is, with so many of the phone companies going to fiber optics, it's becoming more and more difficult to find phone companies that know how to fix and maintain copper wires. Isn't that interesting?
That is amazing. Even more amazing than the fact that something passed Congress in this session.
Well, you know what? It's weather. It's weather, and everybody can relate to the weather. And if you're a responsible and savvy politician, you understand that anything you can do related to weather and increasing the service of weather warnings and so forth is good for your constituents, and they're going to vote for you. So
well, there you go. There's the secret to politics 2024 right there. More weather in our politics.
That's what that's what they told us about TV. They said you got your news, your weather, your sports. Most people watch the weather. Everybody watches the weather because not everybody's into the news, not everybody's into the sports, but we're all personally affected by weather. And so the NOAA Weather Radio Modernization Act has passed, and it means good things for the NOAA Weather Radio Network.
And Bruce, you and your company are nice enough to give our listeners a discount. Talk about the special that you offer to the WeatherBrains audience and how they can get if they don't have, or if they have a friend or a family member or a neighbor, that needs a weather radio. It's a great gift and an opportunity to get it at a discounted price.
Absolutely. And we've got Mother's Day coming up. We've got Father's Day coming up, and we've got hurricane season. Well, tornado season first, and then we go into hurricane season. So if you have any family or friends that live in a hurricane zone, one of those hand crank emergency radios is great because it has AM and FM on it, and then the flashlight. And with the hand crank, if you lose power for a day, 2 days, a week, 2 weeks, thank goodness you can still crank that radio and listen to AM and FM radio coverage, and of course NOAA weather radio as well. So those emergency crank radios are good for travel. They're also good if you live in a hurricane zone, and very effective for that. That white desktop radio, those are really good for Tornado Alley, because you can tell that what county you live in, what zone you live in. And then that'll only go off for warnings that pertain to your specific area. With the WeatherBrains promotion, you can get 25% off any of these radio products when you go to midlandusa.com. The promo code is SPAN25. That's SPANN25. SPAN25 is the promo code. And when you use that promo code, you get 25% off all the weather products and accessories at midlandusa.com. So the emergency crank radio is really good for the hurricane zones, especially if you're evacuating. And then those white desktop radios with specific area message encoding, that one you can tell exactly where you live. And I'll add, the reason I'm going to Nevada Emergency Management next week is because Las Vegas office of National Weather Service has just been testing for the past 2 years what they call partial county alerting, which means not only can you tell your weather radio what county you live in, you can tell it what portion of that county you live in. So if you live in the northwest corner of the county, you'll only get warnings for the northwest corner of that county. That's brand new, should be rolling out nationwide in 2025.
Outstanding. So be sure and tell your friends. If you have a weather radio, your friends need one, your relatives need one, we all need one. It's the baseline. It's an amazingly reliable service. It's like a smoke alarm in your house for a tornado. You can't beat these. So be sure and pass along that special offer to all of your friends. All right, we ran late this week, but that's okay. This was a fun show. I mean, sometimes you just have to run late here. I mean, but let's quickly go around the horn for picks of the week. We're going to do everybody have a chance to share something really cool that's weather related. Troy Kimmel, let's start with you down in Texas. Give us something good this week.
I'm going to let the pass. So foghorn for me.
Whoa. Wow. The sounds of the fog coming out early. All right, Jen, give us something good.
So I don't get a whole lot of posts about me in radio, and this is not for me to ask people to do this. I don't want you to, but this one came in on Valentine's Day, and it has just brought joy to me. And it's Brandon Hulse tagged me in a tweet, and he listens to my weather forecast in North Platte on 97.1, and he goes, it's become a routine that I do this when you do your weather report on 97.1. So you need to go watch this because it's so cute. He's 16. I'm very excited that a 16-year-old actually knows what a radio is and listens to the radio station. But thank you for being a fan, Brandon. And it brought me some joy. So I wanted to share that.
There you go. That's awesome. Very nice. By the way, mine, it's the tweet from the Weather Service in Sterling, Virginia, Saturday, with that jet streak that was 230 knots overhead, which was pretty interesting, 265 miles per hour. It's a little breezy up there, but they've got the SQT, they've got the upper air map on that, a very interesting high wind aloft event. All right, let's go to Kim. Kim, give us something good.
Yeah, I have a quick twofer this week. One part, a little bit more information about the London smog, the deadly London smog event. And of course, if you have a Netflix subscription, really recommend seeing that episode of The Crown. Was a very fantastic overview of what it was like to go through that event. I also have a wonderful article from the New York Times that details what happened in Pitcher and Treese, Oklahoma, that ecological disaster and the subsequent efforts that it took to move people out and what's gone on with those populations, what they've experienced. So just another angle on sort of the legacy aspect of the environmental disasters that we're talking about tonight.
Great. And all these pics will be up on weatherbrains.com. Let's get to James Adelot before he has to go to the 9 o'clock news. James, you still there?
Yes, sir. We're running a little late because of the NASCAR race, but so hey, good night to run late. We'll try to do it again next Monday as well. Mine's the VAD from Chico, California this morning, the vertical derived display from the 88D of the wind profile, because they had a pretty high end parameter space for low top supercells. I did see a couple of tornado warnings there, but just to give you an idea, the 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative velocity was 202 meters squared per second squared. So that's a pretty good parameter space for the California Central Valley, especially north of Sacramento.
Yeah, a very interesting situation out there. All right, let's see.
By the way, get ready because deterministic 7-day GFS output will soon be posted by all the weather geeks quickly on Twitter as we start looking at an active spring, and it may start early next week. So be ready for all those deterministic model posts that'll drive us all crazy.
All right. We all know it's coming. I got to get those clicks, likes, shares, and engagement up. That's the way to do it. All right, Dr. Jacobs, give us a pick of the week. Go.
I'm going to plug a couple of things before I get to my pick, but I'm going to tease a surprise coming up on March 6th. I can't tell you what it is because there's no online link yet, but it'll be cool. Trust me.
Ooh.
But I did want to plug on March 1st, I'm going to be doing an AMS Weather Band podcast with Alicia Bentley, who runs Global Model Verification. She's the lead on that at EMC, and we're going to be talking about all the cool new things coming up with Global NWP. But my pick of the week is the Southeastern Coastal Atmospheric Processes Symposium at the University of South Alabama. I am the warm-up act for James Spann.
Oh, please. It's the other way around. I'm just the stooge that will be setting up Dr. Jacobs. So
what are the dates on that?
It is April 6th and 7th, and registration is open now.
Yeah, I have done that conference before. The last time I was there, Neil, I remember Rich Thompson was there from SPC. Marshall Shepard was there from the University of Georgia, and Mike Gibson was there, the Gibson Ridge software guy. and we had a marvelous time. CCAPS is a great conference, and really that's just going to be a lot of fun. Very, very good. All
I
right,
can't
Bruce,
go because of the eclipse. That's the same weekend as the eclipse is on Monday. Dang it.
Well, the conference is on a Saturday and Sunday. It's not on
But
Monday.
I'm going to San Antonio on Saturday, so.
Oh well. All right, Bruce Jones, give us pick of the week. Go.
Hey, I found a place that actually likes it when California goes into a horrific drought. Rancho Palos Verdes is in Los Angeles County. It's down on the Pacific coast, and the Portuguese Point neighborhood is slipping into the sea. It gets really bad when they have a rainy spell because the soil is very clay and it becomes very slippery. This neighborhood can slip as much as a foot a month during a really rainy spell. And there are homes there that have actually slipped down to where they're on someone else's property. It's in a matter of sometimes an inch or so per day during these really rainy spells.
Did you say they look forward to these atmospheric river events?
No, they like it when it's a drought.
Yeah,
if it's a drought and they have no rain, yeah, they're happy. When it starts raining, the soil gets really mushy and slippery. But this Portuguese Point neighborhood in Rancho Palos Verdes, I'll send you the link to the slideshow presentation from the city government out there. It's rather phenomenal, but the people, some of them have learned to deal with it, and they don't really want to leave. It's fascinating.
Wow. Very interesting. All right, Bill Murray, wrap us up. Go.
Yeah, big snowflakes coming down tonight in Truckee, California. They're getting ready for another big snow event that's already taken shape in the mountains there. I love that place. Yeah, I'm excited about the eclipse. It probably will be a huge southwesterly flow all the way from the Texas Hill Country to Cleveland, where my backup room is, for the eclipse. We'll see how that goes. I'm reminded, talking to Andy tonight about, how important industry especially was in the mid 20th century economically for a lot of people, because it provided a path out of poverty. My dad, we'd drive by the big paper mill in Cantonment, Florida when I was a kid on the way to the beach, and it would smell terrible. And, we'd all roll the windows up and he'd say, "It's the smell of money," and that was kind of the attitude, it was the smell of money. But I really enjoyed having Andy on tonight. I actually have a pick. The Weather Service in Key West did a fabulous story maps on the No Name Low from last November, 15th and 16th, and that map is fabulous. I ran across it because I was looking for the rating, Jen, if they had rated that tornado that hit Cudjoe Key that you put in your newsletter today. And I never saw what the rating was, but I found that when I went over there. And of course, get ready, bring your pajamas, your popcorn, everything next week. Tom Grazoulis will be our guest. And if the what would I call it? The like show, or or at least the discussion that we have in advance of the show. His wife said, he may not want to go very long. I said, if we get him for 10 minutes, I'll be happy. We talked for an hour and a half, and I wrote down everything he said. So I'm going to bring it all back up next Monday night. So be ready, James. We may go to midnight next Monday night.
All right. I like it. I like it a lot. But for this week, we've got to wrap this sucker up here. We're a couple of minutes after 9 o'clock Central, but it was all worth it. If you're new here, we're typically on the air every Monday night at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. And you can watch us live on YouTube, the YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/weatherbrains. But we know most of you listen to the audio podcast. However you consume the show, thank you. If you want to get in touch with us, have a chance to be the email of the week, send us an email. The address is email@weatherbrains.com. And we're just glad you're here. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and God bless.
Thank y'all all for being here. That was a lot of fun.
That was great. Thank
That
y'all.
was fun. Thanks, everybody.
Bet. See you Monday.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So, listen, I got to play this mail from the Adams. If you were at the beginning of the show, I was talking about mails in on the Adams family. I pulled some audio. I've not listened to this. Let's see what this sounds like.
In.
Yep. That's exactly what I remember. Mails in, the Addams Family. All right, we got to go. See y'all next Monday night. Bye.